In 2006, Zack Greinke suffered a mental breakdown so severe it caused an incident that resulted in him quitting baseball so he could mow lawns. Since then, he has become one of the most dominating pitchers of his era. Zack Greinke tells opposing batters what pitch is coming, throws 50-mile-per-hour curveballs, openly admits to hate having fans in the stands, and when he was asked if he was excited about starting Game 7 of the World Series, he said this.
Yeah, gonna be a big game.
Zack Greinke is weird, and today he is loved for it, but this has not always been the case. There have been times throughout his career where Greinke has been one of the most misunderstood and disliked players in baseball. He's been called a sullen loner, an utterly failed starter, a coach called him aloof, a teammate said he wanted to punch him in the face, opponents have called him a socially awkward turd, and one even tried to kill him. Zack Greinke is truly one of a kind. He once stopped pitching, called a mound visit with his catcher just so he could propose a fantasy football trade. Another time, he took Yasiel Puig's suitcase out of the team bus and threw it into traffic. When he was called up to the major leagues as a 20-year-old, he asked his manager if he could go back to single A and become a shortstop, even though he was the #1 pitching prospect in baseball. He's considered quitting baseball to become a tennis player, wants to be a golfer, and even told Royals head of player development that he wanted to be a trash man. Zack Greinke went from being viewed as an arrogant, immature letdown to one of the most talented, liked, and flat-out inspiring players in baseball, and he did it in the weirdest way possible. Throughout its history, baseball has seen its fair share of characters. Roger Moret was put into a straitjacket and hospitalized because he became frozen in a catatonic state after a game. Mark Fidrych used to talk to the ball while pitching. And every time a fire truck would pass the stadium, Ruud Waddell would run off the field and chase it. All three of these players accomplished impressive feats as baseball players, but their performances were overshadowed by their struggles with mental illness, quirkiness, and straight-up strange behavior. And in 2006, Zack Greinke was at risk of being put into this category. Greinke had been struggling inside for over a year and was going through the darkest period of his life. And one day during Royal Spring Training Camp, it all boiled over. What followed was an incident so dramatic that it led to Greinke quitting baseball altogether. He was 22 years old and had been the #1 prospect in baseball. He was literally called the future of pitching. But growing up, Zack wasn't even really a pitcher. First, he was a tennis player who competed in international tournaments, but he quit because he was so scared to lose he cried before matches. He was also a golfer, but quit that too because they moved him up too many age groups. Greinke to this day doesn't enjoy golf, but the few teammates who have seen him golf says he only does it barefoot or in flip-flops. In high school, his real love was being a shortstop. In his 4-year high school career, he never hit under .444 and only began pitching as a sophomore, where he became one of the best in the country. Greinke threw a 95-mile-per-hour fastball through a wide variety of pitches and altered his delivery throughout the game. Greinke was doing things like this, methods pitchers like Johnny Cueto and Marcus Stroman have made popular over the past several years. Yeah, Greinke was doing that in 2002 when he was 17 years old. And he did it so much that local umpires called a private meeting with Greinke so he would stop doing it because they felt he was showing up his opponents. And to be honest, he probably was, but scouts saw this as a sign of baseball IQ above any other high school pitcher they had ever seen. But as you can probably guess, the pitching mechanics of Zack Greinke weren't the only thing different about him. In a home run derby, Greinke was ahead by so much, he started batting lefty, hit one more home run, and then left the field. He was one of the top prospects in the country, was a lock to be a first-round draft pick, was dating his future wife who was Miss Daytona Beach and eventually a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, but he was too anxious to eat lunch in the cafeteria. Zack Greinke was the most impressive and overachieving kid at his high school, but he obviously hated the attention that came with it. However, that did not stop him from going on the morning announcements.
If you can't make the meeting for a legitimate reason, please see Coach Bridges the day before the meeting.
Greinke would go on to get picked 6th overall in the 2002 draft, a draft that was stacked in talent. A lot of these players, just like Greinke, have had amazing MLB careers, but almost all of these players, unlike Greinke, are way too old and not good enough to still play baseball. For most people, getting drafted is one of the highlights of their life, but for Greinke, it was the start of a large influx of stress, which resulted in a dramatic decline in mental health, and eventually led to an event that changed his life forever. During his rookie year, Greinke put up numbers that had one minor league coach say that he was the best minor league pitcher he had ever seen. That year, Greinke also called his parents on multiple occasions, telling them that he was quitting. Greinke describes a time when he panicked, packed all of his belongings, and asked the Royals if he could go on a few-day vacation. But he didn't actually plan on having a vacation. He planned on escaping the team and never playing baseball again. Luckily, the Royals said no and the plan was ruined. Shortly after that, he was called up to the major leagues. Most players are excited about going to the major leagues. Zack Greinke was not. He asked his manager if instead of going to Kansas City, he could go back to Single A and become a shortstop. The Royals said no. When Greinke arrived in Kansas City, he was immediately the best pitcher on the team. He finished the year with a higher WAR than any other rookie in the league, but somehow only finished 4th in Rookie of the Year voting. Putting up these kind of numbers as a 20-year-old is pretty insane, but teammates quickly realized that his pitching ability may have been the most normal thing about Zack Greinke. He rarely talked to anyone, played in the bullpen dirt during spring training, would sleep in his locker before games, and even though he had just signed a $2.5 million signing bonus, Greinke lived with George Brett and his family so he could save $1,000 a month on rent. Greinke says that during this time, walking into the clubhouse alone would result in him going into a full state of panic because he just really didn't want to interact with anyone. And even today, with empty stadiums due to COVID, in between innings, Greinke sits in the stands by himself instead of going to the dugout, because it is a lot less stressful for him when no one is bothering him. And when someone does bother Zack Greinke, he is not shy to tell them. In 2017, pitcher and avid autograph collector Pat Neshek asked Greinke if he could sign a baseball card for him. Greinke said yes, but according to him, only did because he thought Neshek was a completely different pitcher named Brad Ziegler. When the card was sent to Greinke to be signed, he turned it down. Neshek confronted Greinke during batting practice, and Greinke told Neshek that he wore him out and wouldn't even sign if his kid asked.
Yeah, I've been feeling bad for 2 years, been being mean, and just, I didn't mean it personally.
Neshek responded by going online to baseball card trading forums and calling Greinke a socially awkward turd.
Get a life, Pat Neshek. You're a professional baseball player.
And this is just one of the many beefs Greinke has had between him and his opponents throughout his career. During his first few years in Kansas City, Greinke would go to a local high school field and hit off a tee for hours. Greinke really wanted to become an everyday player because all the downtime in between starts was becoming torture. Greinke was so serious about this transition, he once walked into his manager's office and started listing out reasons why hitting was easy. The Royals obviously didn't take him seriously because it's pretty ridiculous to have your best pitcher become an everyday player, but in Arizona that year, Greinke was given his only opportunity to hit. He got absolutely shelled in this game, giving up 11 runs in 5 innings, but his manager kept him in the game just so he could get one more at bat and see if Greinke knew what he was talking about, and he did this. Greinke later said that he hit this ball with his eyes closed, and I'll let you be the judge, but it looks like he hit this ball with his eyes closed. Before the game, Greinke had promised his general manager that he would hit a home run, and he did, but they still wouldn't let him be an everyday player. He was stuck on the mound where he had the worst year of his career. He dramatically regressed from his rookie year stats, his anxiety was worse than ever, he had a feud with his pitching coach about where to stand on the rubber, and he refused to follow the Royals' offseason pitching program. The following year, the Royals fired a new pitching coach, and the first thing Greinke told him was that he doesn't throw a changeup, he doesn't throw a two-seamer, and he doesn't listen to pitching coaches. Greinke also skipped going to batting practice and had to be forced into doing team photos after he refused to do so. In reality, Greinke was suffering through the worst mental state of his life, and he soon reached a boiling point during a bullpen session that spring. Greinke became so overwhelmed and upset, he said he wanted to throw the ball over the center field wall, but didn't because he was surrounded by dozens of scouts and Royals employees. This only put more pressure on Greinke, who was throwing fastballs as fast as he could directly at the backstop until he eventually marched off the field into the clubhouse to talk to the Royals general manager, who later said it was the most intense conversation he he's ever had. The Royals understood the desperate situation Greinke was in and allowed him some time off to get help, but in Greinke's head, this was not time off, this was retirement. At the time, Greinke said his goal was to mow lawns, but basically he just wanted to do something that didn't require him to interact with anyone, because even the simplest social interactions had become way too overwhelming. Greinke was told to go to a psychologist who diagnosed him with a social anxiety disorder and depression, and prescribed him medication that Greinke says changed his life forever. After a few months, Greinke returned to baseball way faster than he expected. He had overcome the biggest mental health battle of his life, but he had many battles left to fight. These occurred in the form of brawls, ejections, and even off-the-field conflicts between Greinke, his opponents, and even his own teammates, not to mention the constant criticism he was getting from the media, the league, and even his own team. Greinke had bounced back from the scariest period of his life, but his reputation was at an all-time low. When he returned from retirement, he asked the Royals if he could pitch out of the bullpen because he didn't like having to wait 4 days to pitch, and the Royals agreed. Greinke pitched so well that the Royals were ready to call him up, but Greinke again begged the Royals to let him stay in the minor leagues instead of going to the majors, and this time the Royals agreed. Greinke seemed to enjoy his time out of the spotlight, but that did not last long. When returning to the major leagues, he was sent to the bullpen in what one reporter called the last desperate act from an organization and player close to calling it quits. He also referred to Greinke as a sullen loner and an utterly failed starter, but the media were not the only ones insulting Greinke. A Royals employee told reporters Greinke's personality was a Rain Man act and just a game to him. His former landlord George Brett said he needed to grow up. One teammate said he liked Zack but also wanted to punch him in the face, and Zack even had to apologize to his entire team after a spring training outing where he gave up 7 runs basically on purpose, saying that he felt so good he wanted to dial it back some and didn't want to waste good pitching. However, Royals manager Trey Hillman understood that Greinke was just someone with severe anxiety trying to handle one of the most stressful positions a 22-year-old can be in. He made a promise with Zack that he only had to talk to him once every 4 days. And this strategy worked very well because after spending a year mostly out of the bullpen, Greinke returned to be a starter in 2009 and became the most dominating pitcher in baseball. He led the league in ERA, FIP, WHIP, and home runs per 9. He won the Cy Young easily. Within 3 years of quitting baseball altogether, Greinke had become the best pitcher in the world. And he absolutely hated it. He openly acknowledged that he wished he hadn't won the award because he found the attention to be a burden. So much so that when fans started chanting Cy Young in Kauffman Stadium, he publicly stated he found it annoying and wished it would stop. He gave his award and every other prize that accompanied the Cy Young to his parents except for one. It was a samurai sword Mizuno gave him, which he says is the only award he's ever kept in his entire life. And when asked about if he had been thinking about the significance of his Cy Young over the offseason, he responded by saying, quote unquote, "Not really, I've been playing this game World of Warcraft and I haven't been thinking much about baseball." Greinke hates awards and attention so much. Later on in his career, when he lost a no-hitter late in the game, he said he wasn't disappointed because it would have been more of a hassle than anything else. But as annoying as Greinke found the Cy Young to be, it did relieve much of the criticism he endured. Except, there was one problem. He was on the Kansas City Royals, and the Kansas City Royals sucked. Zack did not want to play there, and after one more season with the Royals where Zack admits he wasn't motivated and didn't really try, he went to the Royals and requested a trade. Reports leaked that Zack refused to go to spring training if he wasn't traded, and once again, the media tore him apart. But Greinke maintains that the Royals needed to trade him and that they weren't going to do it unless he forced them to. Greinke was traded to Milwaukee, and honestly, he didn't get off to the best start. He immediately had to miss the first few weeks of the season because of an injury he suffered during pickup basketball and told the media he didn't listen during team meetings because they wore him out. But he did save himself by telling reporters he hadn't met any teammates who he found annoying yet. When he started pitching in Milwaukee, Zack's personality began to show more, and people began to realize that he's not like any other player in baseball. He is a lot weirder, and his battle with social anxiety and depression are actually the most normal and relatable thing about Greinke. Greinke's mental health history makes him admirable and inspiring. What makes Zack Greinke weird has nothing to do with mental health. It has to do with the actions he makes on and off the field that very few players in baseball would have the balls to do. This earned Zack a lot of enemies, which have resulted in multiple brawls, ejections, injuries, and even off-the-field word matches. Greinke is known for throwing the slowest pitches in baseball to a point where it's comical, but when he played with the Brewers, he literally had a competition with teammate Randy Wolf on who could throw the slowest pitch, and they went back and forth all year. But eventually, Greinke won with a curveball at 53 miles per hour. Perhaps the fastest pitch he threw that year was directly at the ground after this close call, and for some reason he got ejected for it. Shortly after this, Greinke was traded and eventually landed with the Dodgers, where for some reason he just kept getting into fights.
I don't remember the last time I wanted to get in a fight with someone. No, I guess.
Greinke has never been afraid to throw pitches at batters. He even threw a pitch at Juan Soto, even though he knew if he hit him, he would load the bases. And it was the World Series. And according to one of his minor league teammates, Greinke admitted to hitting him on purpose to keep his pitch count low, even though they were teammates and it was spring training. Greinke had hit Carlos Quentin twice before for crowding the plate, and the third time he hit Quentin, he tried to kill him. He didn't kill Greinke, but he did break his collarbone, forcing him to miss 2 months. When Greinke returned from the DL, he threw a pitch at Diamondbacks catcher Miguel Montero after the Diamondbacks hit Yasiel Puig earlier in the game. Then the Diamondbacks threw at Zack Greinke's head. All hell broke loose, everyone got involved, including hitting coach Mark McGwire, but Greinke just walked to first base. After the game, Miguel Montero called Zack Greinke a chicken. Ironically, Greinke even fought the teammate he was trying to protect that night. According to a book written by Molly Knight, Puig was holding up the team bus trying to find his luggage in the luggage bay, and after ignoring multiple requests to re-enter the bus, Greinke went outside, grabbed Puig's luggage, threw it onto Michigan Avenue, and the two had to be restrained. But Greinke has later said very nice things about Puig.
I would say it'd be much more of a positive, the way the clubhouse is, than a negative.
Even with Puig in it.
Yes, he's fine.
And perhaps Greinke's best moment in Los Angeles occurred during a team meeting where manager Don Mattingly was giving an intense speech about the team's poor performance. When he finished, he asked the team if anyone had anything else they wanted to say. Greinke stood up and scolded his teammates on not washing their hands after using the restroom. Greinke also is known for being extremely involved in his team's scouting department because he just thinks it's fun. In Kansas City, he constantly told the front office what he thought the team should do. In Arizona, he would travel to college games with scouts just to check players out. One time, his catcher AJ Ellis asked Greinke what he thought the team should do to improve the team. Greinke thought about it for a while, went back to Ellis and said, quote unquote, "I would trade you." He's also told Royals employees that he wanted to become a trash man after retirement, and even told a reporter that he was thinking about quitting baseball to play professional tennis. But it doesn't seem like Greinke wants to retire anytime soon. He has always focused on longevity. This is a guy who stopped throwing his slider because he would go to bed with his elbow feeling quote unquote somewhat different. His elbow didn't even hurt, it just felt different. In 2009, Greinke won the Cy Young throwing his slider 22% of the time. In 2013, he threw it 2% of the time and still had a 2.63 ERA without throwing his best pitch. The next year, I guess his elbow started feeling normal again because the slider came back. He was an all-star the next 2 years and put up an ERA of 1.66, the lowest ERA of any starting pitcher since Greg Maddux in 1995. But apparently, it really doesn't matter what pitch Greinke throws because in this past season, he's literally been telling batters what pitch is coming, and somehow batters...
Oh my, everybody knows what sign they're going with now.
still can't hit it. Except for once somebody did hit it, but most of the time they still can't hit his pitches even when they know what's coming. Probably has a lot to do with the fact that Greinke has thrown 9 different pitches throughout his career, and he's thrown them all at different speeds. His average velocity of his fastball has consistently declined every year, but it really doesn't matter because he's always preferred to throw his fastball slow anyway. He throws curveballs that go 88 miles per hour and curveballs that go 55 miles per hour, and he literally throws a changeup and fastball that are pretty much the exact same speed. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but somehow it works. Only do hitters not know what's coming. Greinke doesn't always know what's coming either, and honestly, when it comes to Zack Greinke, nobody really knows what's coming. He's been considered crazy, egotistical, and even a failure, but despite the criticism and pressure Greinke's endured, he's overcome it all, even while suffering through an intense battle with anxiety to become a future Hall of Fame pitcher. Zack Greinke is one of the most dominating pitchers in baseball, the most inspiring player in baseball, and the weirdest player in baseball, all at the same time.
Whatever they do is fine with me. Well, I was going to say something about it. Nothing too interesting.